Okay, now it's time to recap this weekend's action involving Tsunami, the then reigning WBO champion, versus Senicia Estrada, the challenger. This fight took place in the light flyweight division, and it's a fight that lived up to my expectations because I expected that Senicia was going to have to work for it, and that's exactly what she did. You have to understand that a fighter like Tsunami, whilst not as polished or as athletically gifted as Senicia Estrada, still brings something to the table. And the more a fighter brings to the table, the harder it is to look perfect against them. In Senicia's last fight before this one, her and her people tried to make some unification matches with some of the other champions in the minimum weight division to no avail. Thus, Senicia had to move up in weight looking for opportunities. And Tenkai, she answered the call.
You see the discrepancy in size.
You see that Tenkai is a bigger woman than Senicia Estrada is, but not just a bigger woman, a more experienced fighter, a more experienced champion. And that's what we saw when the two locked horns on Friday night, that Senicia Estrada definitely is gifted, but she's still got to work for it because Tenkai didn't come to lay down, didn't come to lay off.
You push.
She's going to push back. And that's very beneficial for Senicia Estrada, the young champion, because you don't want to go drinking your own Kool-Aid. That's the worst thing for a fighter. Developing a false sense of security based on opponents.
Really aren't that ambitious.
Maybe they are ambitious, but the level at which they compete doesn't allow them to get but so far. I anticipated that this might be the most difficult fight of Senicia Estrada's career, and it looked that way in there with Tenkai Tsunami.
She won.
Senicia was the busier puncher, the more polished fighter in the fight, getting off shots, displaying her speed, her quickness, her accuracy, her movement. But Tenkai had moments of success. That discrepancy in height, discrepancy in size, created an environment to where Senicia's getting hit with straight shots on the way out.
Of course, Tenkai doesn't have to be right up on her to hit her.
Because even though Tenkai is a mid-range to inside fighter, the discrepancy in size creates an environment to where Tenkai can at least touch Senicia on Senicia's way out. Senicia having all that in and out game, that pep in her step, all that bounce, she can work her way in, but on the way out, she's got to be careful that she's not getting hit with straight shots, and that's what was going on in this fight.
In spots.
You did see Senicia's head getting snapped back by the straight shots from Tenkai Tsunami here and there. Perhaps not enough to pick up most of the rounds, but enough that you saw it. More than once, more than twice, more than thrice.
Senicia was still the busier fighter, though.
Throwing more and landing more. The body work from Senicia Estrada really caught my eye because that got Tenkai Tsunami to slow down a bit, simmer down, lay off.
At one point, I thought Senicia was going to stop her.
Drilling Tenkai Tsunami's midsection, working that body, pinning her down against those ropes and letting off some salvos, letting off some shots. I'll tell you something, every time Senicia Estrada gets out there, it's a good advertisement for women's boxing in this part of the world because not only is she getting out there, securing the W, but she's doing it against credible opponents, collecting credible scalps. The last fight was the scalp of the long-reigning WBA minimum weight champion, Annabelle Ortiz, who Senicia dropped right on her back pocket, right on her ass. In this fight, she had a good scrap, good tear-up, good Donnybrook with Japan's own WBO light flyweight champion, Tenkai Tsunami. With that, Senicia Estrada effectively became a two-division champion on Friday night, allowing her to advance from the number 9 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list to the number 8 spot ahead of Mexico's own Dili Luna.
And there are some updates.
Very recently, Denmark crowned a two-division champion of their own, Dina Thorsland, who managed to become a champion at 2 weights when she picked up the vacant bantamweight title in her neck of the woods against Noriega. Dina Thorsland has held the WBO title at 2 weights, count them, 2 separate divisions, 118 pounds and 122 pounds, racking up 3 title defenses as a super bantamweight champion and picking up the newly vacated title at 118 pounds. That was enough for Dina to bump Erica Cruz off the list because Erica's body of work...
It's not quite as robust as Dina's.
Very recently, Mexico's own Erica Cruz unseated the long-reigning featherweight champion, Jelena Marjanovic, and that is a very credible scalp, it is, but that singular victory wasn't enough for her to hold on to that number 10 spot that number 10 slot that saw her in the most danger of being bumped off. Comparatively, Dina Thorsland has been a champion longer, at more weights now, than Erica. Erica's a newly crowned champion. Thus, those eggs, they need more bacon.
Now, if Erica ends up fighting Sarah Mahfoud,
Erica, who just turned down 100 large to unify with Amanda Serrano on the undercard of Jake Paul versus Tyrone Woodley. Let's say Erica ends up fighting Sarah Mahfoud instead, the IBF's reigning featherweight champion. If she were to beat Sarah Mahfoud and unify those two titles, she'd bump Dina off the list.
till Dina racks up a big win.
Those would be two very credible scalps for Erica Cruz. You know, the scalp of Jelena Marjanovic, which she already collected, and potentially the scalp of Sarah Mahfoud. Now, is it going to happen that way? I don't know. I think, quite anecdotally, that Erica would rather unify with Sarah Mahfoud than try and unify with Amanda Serrano. She doesn't stand much chance of beating Amanda Serrano, and we all know it. Japan's own reigning WBA champion, Naoko Fujioka, advances from number 5 to number 6 for successfully defending her WBA title after a 2-year hiatus, a 2-year stint of inactivity. Naoko still got it.
She ain't a 5-division champion for nothing.
Naoko ranks in at number 5, just behind 7-division champion of Puerto Rico, Amanda Serrano. Naoko ranks in at number 5, and Costa Rica's own multi-weight champion, Hannah Gabriels, who has graced the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list before. She re-emerges at number 6 after having simultaneously picked up the WBA title at light heavyweight and the WBC title at heavyweight against Marta Gaitan. Argentinia's own veteran champion Jessica Bopp, she's starting to lose ground to the other girls on the list because the other girls on the list were a lot more active than she is.
It's been 2 years since she had a fight.
Jessica hasn't seen any action since June of 2019 when she locked horns with Gabriela Zaveda. We know Jessica was trying her hand at the amateur ranks, attempting to go on an Olympic run. Things didn't work out. That's how she's been occupying her time professionally. She's been inactive for 2 years, and that inactivity has caused her to drop from number 5 to number 7. And if this keeps up, she'll drop off the list altogether. These are the updates to the women's pound-for-pound rank standings. In other news, a continuation to a story we talked about in my previous video. Ryan O'Hara tweeted, "I'm also told that Canelo has no interest in fighting on pay-per-view and wants fans to be able to afford to watch his fights. Hashtag boxing." Well, that's awful sweet of Canelo.
Such a great guy.
Now, here's the thing. That's probably true to some degree. Canelo probably doesn't want his fights behind a pay-per-view paywall anymore.
He has been on his own all this time.
Is it really because he wants the fights to be more affordable for me and you? Probably, to some degree. To some degree, he probably does want as many eyes and as many ears on his fights as he can possibly get, and putting fights behind a paywall, well, that doesn't let you do that.
So to some degree, that might be true.
But I don't believe that's the crux of it. I don't believe that's what's at the heart of the matter. You know what's at the heart of the matter? The pay-per-view model is unstable. That's what's at the heart of the matter. The old saying goes, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. That proverbial bush would be pay-per-view.
You're taking your chances that people are going to buy your fight.
You're taking your chances that illegal piracy of pay-per-views won't cut into your pay-per-views by rate. There's a lot more things that can go wrong on pay-per-view that won't go wrong on a streaming app like DAZN.
I mean, look at Trilla.
Not that long ago, they tried to scare all the internet pirates that pirated that Jake Paul versus Ben Askren fight. They tried to scare those guys into paying for the fight after those guys had already stolen it, because a good number of them,
Good luck with that.
they stole the fucking fight. They didn't buy it. And the same is true for a lot of fights, a lot of pay-per-views, not exclusive to the sport of boxing. Theoretically, you know, pay-per-view might run you $74.99 a pop. And with that kind of a price tag, if enough people buy it, yeah, you'll make a lot of money. That's if enough people buy it. Theoretically.
Big if these days.
You guys saw what Bruce Tremblay said. Wilder vs. Fury 2 did good business at the gate, but overall was a box office flop due to piracy.
The world is changing.
Americans are cutting the cord, as it were. Streaming apps are all the rage. Hulu, Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max.
DAZN.
The American populace's eyes aren't glued to the TV the way they used to be in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. The world has changed, and now their eyes are glued to their mobile devices, their tablets, and their laptops, and, on occasion, their television sets.
There's smart TVs that come with streaming apps.
The days of paying a cable bill, an inflated cable bill, for over 100 channels that you probably don't watch, those days are coming to an end. The sun is setting.
The world is streaming.
The way that cassettes replaced 8-track tapes and CDs replaced cassettes, CDs were subsequently replaced by MP3s and MP4s, and now you can just go on Pandora if you want to hear your favorite songs or your favorite genre of music.
The way we view sports is changing.
So why would you take your chances on the antiquated pay-per-view model where people may or may not decide to purchase your fight?
A streaming app can guarantee you money up front.
A streaming app whose source of revenue are its monthly subscribers, month to month, a more stable revenue stream than hoping that 1 million or 2 million people decide to buy a fight for one night.
What if they don't?
What if people do buy the fight, but it's not as many people as you thought it would be? Well, that cuts into your profits. And with piracy at an all-time high...
Why would you want to run those risks if you don't have to?
Why would you want to when a streaming app can guarantee you as much as, 20, 25 million, maybe even 30 million up front with incentives, provided you bring them a certain number of subscribers? Why would you want to run risks when you don't have to? I mean, that's why the old saying goes, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
You choose uncertainty over certainty.
You'd gamble what you don't even have for something that you do have, or at least something you have with more certainty than what is the alternative.
That's why Canelo don't want to be on pay-per-view anymore.
Because he's got a good thing going. He's got a good situation with DAZN. He has his freedom, he's not tied down, and he gets his money up front.
Doesn't have to worry about pay-per-view upsides.
You know, it was Warped Fire who left this comment right here on the channel. It was Warped Fire who said it best. Seems everyone forgets that the pay-per-view supplier takes about 50% of the sales. Yes, Canelo can get 1 million buys, but won't earn as much. You have to take into account that pay-per-view isn't a guarantee, especially when the supplier takes 50%, both fighters splits, undercard splits, advertising costs, promotional costs, venue, working staff, bouncers, medical teams, etc., sanctioning fees, taxes, the list goes on. Whereas Canelo fighting on DAZN for 35 million, all he needs to worry about is his taxes.
Is that easy enough for you guys to understand?
Was that clear enough for you? Or was that not clear enough for you? You want I should draw you up a PowerPoint presentation?
Fucking moron.
None of this is painfully hard to understand, yet you're still gonna get the odd guy telling you about why Canelo should fight on pay-per-view for Haymon instead. Essentially a guy who's trying to convince you that you should pay 4 times as much to see the same fight.
You should want to pay 4 times as much.
Because if you're arguing in favor of Canelo Alvarez going over there to the PBC Fox side of things, then that's what would happen.
We'd pay 4 times as much to see the same guy.
4 times as much to see the same fight that we could be seeing on DAZN if Caleb Plant simply crossed over. Because Lord knows, they ain't got the payday on his side of the street that's waiting for him if he crosses over and fights Canelo on DAZN. You know, maybe he could fight Jamal, do decent business. Maybe he could fight David.
Pay-per-view.
David Benavidez, do decent business, but he's not going to get paid fighting those guys what he would get paid fighting Canelo on the DAZN side of things.
Well, you ain't got to worry about a pay-per-view upside.
Where it ain't got to do 300 or 350,000 pay-per-view buys in order for you to make serious money. You can make serious money up front if you cross over.
For a one-off, no strings attached.
DAZN is fully capable of securing both of these fighters sizable purses for their match and delivering the fight to us, the boxing fans, the consumers, at a lower price
$20
than anybody else. If the fight takes place, the same fight with the same 2 fighters takes place on Fox, the fight costs me and you 4 times more than it would if it were on DAZN.
Why the fuck would anybody want to pay 4 times more for the same fight?
Why would any paying customer advocate to pay 4 times more for the same product that they could be paying 4 times less to see? 4 times less to watch.
I don't think any paying customers are going to do that.
That doesn't make a lot of sense. You want to have to pay $74.99 for Canelo versus Anthony Durrell, Canelo versus Plant, Canelo versus Benavidez. Each one of those fights, $74.99, roughly $80 with taxes.
Canelo versus Charlo.
Because you do realize that's what the PBC wants to do. They want Canelo to enter into a multi-fight agreement to gain access to their fighters so that they can charge me and you $80 a pop whenever he fights. 4 fights with 4 fighters, that's 4 pay-per-views that comes to a sum total of roughly $320 for 4 fights.
That's more than an annual DAZN subscription.
An annual DAZN subscription runs you, what, $99? Roughly $100? Whereas if the PBC has it their way, you'll pay 3 times more for what are just 4 fights. Just 4 fights. And you're telling me that people, boxing fans, actual paying customers, are arguing in favor of this.
No, those ain't customers.
That ain't paying public. Those ain't paying boxing fans. I'll tell you who those guys are. Who those guys are
The digital equivalent of a shoplifter.
these fucking guys you see running around telling every man, woman, and his dog about how Canelo needs to go over there and sign to Al Haymon. These ain't guys that pay to see boxing, because if he goes over to Al Haymon, these guys would have to pay more to see boxing. So why would they want that?
They wouldn't.
Not if those guys represented the paying public, and that's the thing. Those guys don't represent the paying public. You know who those guys are? Those are the guys using fire sticks, crack streams, and what have you in order to skip out on the tab to pay for
It
boxing.
doesn't make a difference to those guys what a fight costs.
Because those guys don't fucking pay for anything. So of course they can sit there and argue about how Canelo Alvarez should cross over to the PBC Fox side of things, where his fights would cost me and you 4 times as much. Of course those guys can sit there and say that, because those guys don't pay for anything.
Yeah, they'd rather wrestle with laggy streams than flip the bill.
What kind of schmuck advocates to pay 4 times more for the same product? What kind of schmuck does that?
Nobody would do that.
No paying customer would do that. But a guy who sits in his mother's basement stealing fights and streaming pay-per-views, yeah, they might do that. They might argue in favor of that, because boxing don't cost them nothing anyway.
These are the Haymonites.
That's who those guys are for the most part. The guys you find in the comment section of YouTube videos here on YouTube, on Boxing, Twitter, arguing in favor of Canelo crossing over to the Al Haymon, PBC Fox side of things. That's who those guys are. Bunch of guys who are the digital equivalent of shoplifters trying to give you a product review and tell you how much you should have to pay to see boxing. Guys who don't pay for boxing themselves.
Listen, till you guys can afford to pay for this stuff, go sit at the kids' table.
And that's how I look at it. Don't argue with these people.
They can do that for hours. They got nothing better to do.
In the end, this isn't about pledging fealty to a particular promoter, pledging fealty to a particular platform. No, no, no. This is about value for money to the boxing fan. Value for money to the consumer. For the consumer. That's what it's all about. And if the Zone can pay Plant a career-high purse to stage that same fight with Canelo, then I don't see why he shouldn't cross over.
They can pay you more than you've ever made.
And it won't cost me an arm and a leg to watch. Everybody wins. Well, almost everybody. Not Al Haymon.
Not Fox.